Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we are actually not talking about Ukraine. I figured this would probably be a good break. As you can see, I'm traveling. It's been very hard to put content out, but I've been keeping up with the Ukraine situation, and the next video I should do, if all goes according to plan, should be another interview with another leader of Ukraine, and that will be Saturday. Tomorrow, Friday, I'm traveling again, so thank you for bearing with me. But today I just kind of wanted to go off the beaten path and take a little bit of a relaxing and interesting tour around Netflix. This obviously has nothing to do with cybersecurity, but everything to do with technology. And probably you have Netflix in your life. Most people tend to, but here's what's going on. And I think that this is actually really interesting because as we are looking at this, I think it's something that we're going to see a lot of changes in the way that we used to see Blockbuster out there essentially being the dominant place to get rentals for movies and other things. And now Netflix, I think, may possibly be heading that direction, but not quite in the same way. Now, what prompted me to talk about this is an article that I just read in The Verge, which was entitled Why Netflix is Starting to Crack Down on Password Sharing. And I think this is indicative of a problem that they have that I think is going to make them lose dominance. But here's what's going on, and I want to start with some bits and pieces from that Verge article before I start diving into my own opinion here. Now, here's what's going on. Netflix for years has been extremely lax, I'm sure you know about this, with password sharing, and essentially Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, has said that was a positive thing in the past. So while Netflix technically prohibits users from sharing accounts, quote, with individuals outside or beyond your household, the company has only indicated in the last year or so that it might be considering or exploring ways to start gently reinforcing essentially a crackdown on these kinds of things, essentially making sure that you are not sharing it with all your friends, family, and relatives that don't actually live with you. Now, the company this week announced that it is testing a password sharing crackdown that could curb the number of accounts essentially mooching off of account holders outside of their households. And as a part of this test, Netflix will soon offer users in Chile, Costa Rica, and Peru the ability to add up to 2 additional members to their Netflix accounts as sub-accounts. In Costa Rica, this will cost roughly $3 US on top of the monthly cost of your standard Netflix, meaning that mooching friend or cousin or brother or sister that you've got out there that has your Netflix, you'll now start spending $3 a month if you live in Costa Rica. That may be something that we see coming here to the United States and other places in the world. Now, here's the critical part of the article, and I'm not going to paraphrase. I'm going to quote directly here, but something feels different about this new test as the latest experiment arrives at a critical moment for the company. Netflix has long enjoyed explosive subscriber growth, but recently that started to wane. Balanced against its astronomical content budget numbering in the tens of billions, Netflix needs to get creative about how it's bringing in cash. Going full hall monitor on shared accounts is certainly one way to do it, especially since Netflix has in many households cemented itself as an essential service. Now, there's the rub. And that's what I think is really interesting. Essential service, I think, is a really interesting term. But here's the thing. Netflix is spending a ton on creating or buying original content, but the market is getting crowded in a way that they didn't have to compete of just even a few years ago. Now think about this. Their first independently produced show, I looked this up, was actually Lilyhammer. That starred ex-Sopranos star Steve Van Zandt, aka Silvio Dante from The Sopranos, essentially as a mob boss that is in witness protection moves to Lilyhammer, Norway, and essentially starts his own mob in Lilyhammer, Norway. It's kind of amusing. I've watched it. I enjoyed it, but it is kind of an odd start. I had no idea that was their first original show. They've obviously come a long way since then. I mean, look at the explosions that they've had. During the pandemic, it was Tiger King. They now have Space Force with The Office star Steve Carell, et cetera, et cetera. But think about when they started down this road. Streaming options were incredibly limited. Hulu was only their kind of real alternative. They didn't have market dominance, even though the TV networks were pumping out their content like usually the day after when Hulu was around. But Netflix was the name of the game. They cornered that market very earlier, which is why they are considered a quote-unquote essential service. But are they? Now think about this. We have an even larger Hulu. Disney Plus is just rapidly growing, just vastly growing because they've got Star Wars, all the Disney movies. Disney owns Marvel. They have just a massive amount of content. Now you've got Peacock, aka NBC. They've got The Office, Parks and Recreation, all of those different kinds of things. They are growing by virtue of a legion of Office and Parks and Recs fans out there, not to mention other NBC hits. That's the draw. Paramount Plus, which owns CBS as well as the movie studio, they've got obviously a ton of movies and content. Their main draw tends to be movie quality level Star Trek shows lately that they are spending an absolute fortune on producing, just actually really good content. I'm a Star Trek fan, but they're honestly really good even if you're not. Look at HBO Max. HBO has always been, it's not TV, it's HBO. There's something different. They've got really unusual and interesting content, not to mention cross-sharing, with, some of the, I think it's the DC universe, not the Marvel universe, and a whole bunch of other content as well, such as John Oliver, who's a big draw, Bill Maher, who's a big draw, and there's a plethora of other services out there now. This is really crowded. And on top of this, Netflix also raises their prices. The others have shared subscription models, like Amazon Prime says, we'll give you this for free, or you can rent this, or you can do other things. Amazon, obviously, a massive competitor as well. Hulu, you can actually pay cheaper to have integrated commercials, so it's not commercial free, or you can pay premium for commercial free. All of them are tackling this in different ways, but Netflix really hasn't. They've been very open with their platform saying, yeah, it's $10 a month, now it's $15 a month, it's soon to be $20 a month, and on and on and on. And they basically have this draw of providers. Now, they've always ebbed and flowed. And my logic behind that was when they are releasing new content, essentially what happens is everybody flocks to it. So when Tiger King came out and just how insane that whole show was, they got a ton of new users. Not to mention it's the pandemic. Those people with a little more disposable income said, yeah, I'll pay for a few months to watch Tiger King or whatever, but that ebbs and flows, meaning that new show comes out that everybody has to watch, you get it for a month or so, and then you go away, you cancel your subscription, and on and on and on, but that really doesn't persist. And as an essential service, when you have so many others giving similar content or the same content or overlapping content, just how essential is that? We obviously live in a streaming world. We live glued to our phones, glued to our TVs, glued to our technology and all of that. And less and less people are buying actual cable where you're flipping through channels like tune in Tuesday at 7. I mean, who's doing that anymore? Very few people, except usually the older generations. And so by virtue of that, this is where it is. And I think what we are ripe for is some kind of conglomerate to come along and say, yeah, we will basically integrate all Netflix, all Hulu, all XYZ into one platform, and then they'll all profit share in some way, shape, or form for that privilege to get on that one-stop shop, so you're not paying for like 30 different services in the next 10 years as everybody spins them up. I'm sure there are a million other streaming services I missed that are flying under the radar that are also just denting in the armor that Netflix has. So Netflix is interesting. I don't necessarily think they're going to go the way of Blockbuster. Blockbuster never really produced original content. They were there just to rent you movies, but they also weren't there ahead of the game. That was one of the big problems. They looked at streaming and said, yeah, no, that'll never catch on, which is why Netflix just annihilated them. And when they eventually pivoted to Blockbuster streaming, everybody had already moved. And so when we're looking at this, when we were looking at other costing models for streaming services where I can spend a third of what I'm getting at Netflix, and now I have to put up with some commercials, that sounds pretty good. Not to mention YouTube and all of its content as well, acting as a television streaming service. I mean, the field is so crowded because everybody's essentially taking the innovation that Netflix was and using it for their own purposes, as opposed to just having everything under the umbrella of Netflix, which is what I think Reed Hastings, their founder and CEO, wanted to do originally. So I think this is really interesting. We're going to see where this goes, but I think Netflix is going to actually lose market dominance. Now, it might not be that, that they are just blown out of the water. They might own 40% and everybody else owns 41% or something like that, but here we go. Their only way to survive is to keep creating new content, which pulls in new users, but at the same token, if you're spending that much money on content just to see what'll stick, what'll draw, you're going to inevitably start raising your rates. And at that point, forget inflation, you're just going to be outpacing it. And that's going to be a problem for Netflix. So we're going to see where this goes. I think it's an interesting topic. It's just kind of, I just couldn't do Ukraine today. I just keep going up, but the news, from what I'm understanding today, is positive so far, and that Russian advances have stopped. But today was Netflix, and so hopefully, we'll get back on track, on Saturday. Tomorrow there will be no content, as I mentioned. So that is your Netflix news of the day. I thought it was pretty interesting. I hope you enjoyed it too, and I hope you found it as a bit of a relief to the regular news as well. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.